Today, we got to talk about one of the most interesting teams going into the NBA offseason, and that's the Houston Rockets. Because while the team went all in by bringing in Kevin Durant, keeping a lot of their future draft picks and their flexibility, they had real expectations going into this season and got sent home by the Los Angeles Lakers. So now the questions are getting pretty loud for this Houston Rockets team. Is KD committed to staying with the Houston Rockets long term? Should the Rockets chase to add another superstar? And could James Harden be back on the radar? As is reported, he has an interest in returning back to the Houston Rockets. We'll talk about all that, plus the faith that the franchise has in Reed Shepherd. Reportedly, they see Steve Nash potential in him. We're going to talk about it all and more as we talk about the offseason outlook of the Houston Rockets right after this.
Welcome to the number one place for your daily basketball news and analysis, NBA Central.
What's going on, basketball fans? Welcome to another episode of NBA Central, your number one spot for everything basketball related. I'm the host there, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at NBA Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. The Houston Rockets are a team that find themselves at a crossroads right now, and an interesting place to be in, right? Reportedly, Ime Udoka was one of the, resounding voices in that Houston Rockets organization that wanted them to go after a star and not just rely on youth and the internal development of youth. He wanted them to add a star. They then add Kevin Durant in what was, I won't call it a steal of a deal, but it was a pretty favorable deal when you look at what they gave up and what draft assets they had and they were able to hold on to, namely the Phoenix Suns picks when they got them. But they lost in the first round to the Houston Rockets. And while, Kevin Durant's injury did change the outlook and the thing of that one, this is a Houston Rockets team that absolutely fell apart without KD. And it's not like the Lakers were at full strength in that series either. They were missing Austin Reeves and Luka Doncic for the majority of that series. Now, Austin Reeves did come back into that series, with some games left. But overall, he missed the majority of that series. And so, the Rockets going down 3-0 and stuff like that, it's just, the question becomes about it, are they going to retool, right? With that, or are they going to try to stay the course? One thing said is that, the young guys on this team have a really good relationship, and they do believe and they do play and compete for each other. There have been some questions that were raised on if Kevin Durant actually fits into that. And the next 2 years with Kevin Durant is going to address and I think directly reflect what the front office, the urgency that the front office feels to get this team, in a place and improve when it comes down to it. Now, of course, with the Houston Rockets, one of the early things that happened is they lost Fred VanVleet and really didn't have him at all for the season. And I do think as a leadership point and all that type of stuff, he's important to this team, and missing that it is. But it does raise a question. Did the Houston Rockets move too fast? Is this exactly the moment where they have to get even more aggressive about making their moves? I've said it with other teams. I'm going to say it again with this team, is that for a lot of teams, you have your runway, right? And it's a time where you need to be aggressive, and there's a time where you need to be patient. And if you miscalculate when the time is to do either one of those things, it can drastically set your franchise back worse than what it is. So the first thing, the Kevin Durant trade watch, right? So there have been some talks over if Kevin Durant's going to want out of Houston, things like that. There is no serious indication right now that KD and Houston are heading for a split. I want to be clear on that. There's not that. But of course, NBA fans are already debating the best fits for Kevin Durant. He is still an elite isolation scorer. He is still very much that. But you do have to ask, and Houston has to ask themselves, whether KD still can be the centerpiece of the next move or asset that continues to reset the direction. And depending on how they view that is going to determine a lot of it, right? I think when it looks at is that the Houston Rockets, in my personal opinion, have to evaluate each and every option. And whether that means that in moving Kevin Durant, it can get them the pieces that they need to truly make this a championship contender, or if it's that they need to make another acquisition to kind of support that. And that's what we're going to talk about as we go through this episode. But just to throw this one to you guys, as it stands right now, where do you sit on the Rockets and the options ahead of them? Would you trade more youth, or would you look at trading a vet like Kevin Durant? Like I said, we're going to talk about all the options here, right? So I want to start this off with talking about the best fits if the Houston Rockets do look to move on Kevin Durant. I want to be clear here. In no way am I saying that this is something that's going to happen. I do think that more than likely they're going to run it back with, maybe making some key acquisitions, with trading some pieces off the bench, using the mid-level exceptions, some stuff like that. But if we're looking at teams that could very well be interested in Kevin Durant, I think the first one is that Miami Heat. you have to look at Miami Heat. Not only is Pat Riley always going to be chasing another star, we know that. Kevin Durant also has Team USA ties with Bam Adebayo and Eric Spoelstra for what's that worth. I think Eric Spoelstra's kind of more free-flowing offense that they try to implement, could maximize what KD's strengths are this late in his career. I think they can use a heavy isolation scorer when it comes down to that. Of course, there's a question on if Durant would fit in with Heat culture. I think that Durant kind of, he goes in with whoever the leadership is. Kevin Durant has never really been the biggest and most boisterous leader. You have to have that on your team. Going into Heat culture, I do think he'll adapt, especially this late into his career. If he wants to win, he's going to have to do that. But I do think the Miami Heat are a team that if Kevin Durant and the Houston Rockets decide to own a split, the Miami Heat is going to be a team that's right there, being interested. Another team, I think you have to look at the Atlanta Hawks. The Atlanta Hawks do need a half-court scorer, a true half-court scorer. Now, they did move on from an isolation scorer in Trae Young because he didn't necessarily fit in with that team. Does Kevin Durant fit in more naturally with like the Jalen Smith or Jalen Johnson, who really has turned into a really good facilitator, a triple-double threat? I think because of Jalen's ability to facilitate, maybe it can make a little bit more balance there. And you have to ask yourself, can Jalen be the true number one on a team that actually has aspirations to make it to ECF or something like that? And that's the thing there. He would accelerate the Atlanta Hawks timeline. So there's a big question there in regards to if that would be the right move for sure. But I do think that Atlanta, they just lost Bryson Graham as well, who's going over to Chicago. I do think they're probably going to take a more patient approach in this first year without Trae, than make another move to bring in a big, heavy on-ball isolation scorer. But maybe I could be wrong on that. Shorter contract with Kevin Durant as well with the 2 years there, but we'll see. I think that Atlanta, in my personal opinion, should stay kind of more patient, but I do think, they have to be a team on here. Next up, the Charlotte Hornets. The Charlotte Hornets, who were a great story this year, a fun team to watch as well. I think when you look at the Charlotte Hornets, like with LaMelo Ball, Con Knipple, what they have going on down there, Miles Bridges could be on his way out. If they add a player like Kevin Durant, I do think it takes them another step further. I think they also have players that play really well as a team. He would add some more half-court scoring to that team as well. And I do think they would become a serious threat in the Eastern Conference overnight. But the question is Kevin Durant enough to push them into real relevancy in the playoffs? But I think the Charlotte Hornets are another interesting team to make a move for Kevin Durant as well. I think when you look at all these teams, they have some pieces that the Atlanta Hawks could be interested in, not necessarily needle movers. This isn't about the Houston Rockets getting some huge haul back for Kevin Durant. It's about what it affords them to kind of build out their roster in a more natural way and find pieces that kind of better fit with their youth. But again, as I said at the beginning of this, I think that it's highly unlikely that the Houston Rockets make a significant move like this. But those are some teams that I think you have to take a look at as teams that could be interested in Kevin Durant if they come available. So again, the Miami Heat, the Charlotte Hornets are definitely one as well that I think you have to take a look at, and the Atlanta Hawks. All Eastern Conference teams, which I think makes some sense. You don't necessarily want to trade him in the West if you can avoid it. But let me know what you guys think on that. Are those points that make sense for for the Houston Rockets? Let me know what you guys think on that down below. But it's not only the Kevin Durant trade that you got to think about. Reportedly as well is that James Harden has some interest in making their reuniting with the Houston Rockets. Now, again, take all of this offseason talk with a grain of salt. The Cleveland Cavaliers, are where they are in regards to that. It'd be interesting to see what happens with this Cavs team, in the offseason. I do think that they are an interesting team to watch out for sure. I don't think you can count them out as just a team that's just boring or anything like that. They barely move by on that Houston Rockets team. They're going to face off against the Detroit Pistons, which is going to be a fun series to watch. But if this does end bad, could they, right? Now, this is reportedly he did have mutual interest in a return there in the recent years. And Houston did choose Fred VanVleet over James Harden in 2023. But reportedly that James Harden's reps have gauged interest from Houston a couple of times in regards to that. They do need a on-ball playmaker, right? And James Harden can fit that kind of mold in a little bit. But bringing James Harden back is kind of is that really something that you want to add? Would a Harden reunion really fix the Houston Rockets offense, or will it feel like the Houston Rockets are actually going backwards, right? I think that's the thing that you have to ask here when it all comes down to it. I just don't know, right? I don't know what's going to happen in regards to this one overall, but it does ring something that could be interesting. This does come from Tim McMahon of ESPN that says this: over the past several years, according to team sources and those close to Harden, there have been mutual interest in a reunion. The first opportunity came in 2023 when the organization chose to sign Fred VanVleet to a 3-year, $130 million contract rather than pursue Harden after he had failed to land a maximum contract extension with the 76ers. The next opportunity came this season when Harden's representatives gauged the Rockets' interest in him following the LA Clippers' 6-21 start. After Fred VanVleet's injury, a reunion with their former point guard made a lot more sense than they thought, and Houston was closer to contention after trading for Durant in the offseason, and Harden was still playing at a high level. So at the end of the day, it seems like the Houston Rockets have passed on a Harden reunion several times, but depending on how this situation ends with the Cavs, I don't know if I necessarily see Harden being moved. Like the Cavs just traded Darius Garland for James Harden. And while to say that doesn't necessarily mean that they couldn't be moved, again, we've seen weirder things happen around the NBA. I just don't know if Harden really, while adding to their cap situation, if he really fixes some of the biggest needs that the Houston Rockets do have. But let me know what you guys think on all of that down below. But with that said, right, we got to talk about the belief that we're going to have an offseason outlook for the Houston Rockets. But one of the things is that apparently Reed Shepherd has some big fans in regards to in the Houston Rockets organization. Reportedly, they think it can be Steve Nash or Steve Kerr in regards to that team. Right now, he did struggle in that series against the playoffs, but that was his first playoff series, as a big part of the rotation. He had some games, but he did shoot poorly from three, and we know that the defensive limitations that he brings. But reportedly, internally, there's some that believes he can become an all-time great type of point guard. One rival, Scott, said that he had a more modest, Steve Kerr than Steve Nash, but apparently, some in the Houston Rockets think that this guy, they got a guy in him, and they trust the development of him. And that goes back to the overarching question for the Houston Rockets here is that how much of your own internal improvement do you believe in? Because if you really believe that you can, that the young players, Amen Thompson, Alfred Şengün, Jabari Smith, Reed Shepherd, if you really believe that these guys really have really high ceilings that they have yet to hit, that you're still looking to uncover, maybe you don't really, make some big high-level moves in this offseason, and that could be the best move for them. We'll see, right? But I think now we have to get into the overall offseason for the Houston Rockets, right? I think that their needs are clear, right? First, the Houston Rockets offseason's needs, more shooting. I think they need a secondary playmaker or point guard. They need a 3-and-D wing that they hope that Dorian Finney-Smith was going to be able to be, that he never really was. And they're going to need some big man depth, I think is what's going to happen with it. They're going to need that. To fill out their bench as well, I think that's going to be there. They need somebody who can get that bucket for this team when Kevin Durant is out or something like that. And maybe that does end up being Amen Thompson, right? You guys know I'm a big Amen Thompson guy. I believe wholeheartedly in Amen Thompson and the ceiling that he has there. Of course, he's probably the biggest trade chip that they have on that roster. But when it's all said and done, like they're going to hold on to him because they could. They never really got out of Dorian Finney-Smith what they thought they were going to get out of him, which I think plays a part into them needing a 3-and-D wing on this team to kind of help make things hum a little bit better for them. Ideally, somebody who's really good off ball, can be a really good catch and shoot player. I think they add those things. That's really the shopping list that the Houston Rockets do have. The question is how do they go about acquiring that, right? And that's what you have to look at for this team. And with all these teams, it's about not just about what you need, but what is your realistic tools that you have to get those needs in the building. And that's what the Houston Rockets have to figure out. They have some things that are working in their advantage, right? They're $21 million below the first tax apron, which is an excellent place to be in. It means that you can you're not up against that second tax apron. You can still get your mid-level exception. You still get to aggregate salaries. You still get all of that to do, right? And so I think when you look at this, if you find a mix of these needs that you have here, you can start off the season really good. The question then also becomes about, are they really done making big swings, right? Are they going to pursue another high-profile star, cash in on all the draft picks that they have, cash in on some of the young talent that they have to move on? You have guys like Jabari Smith who could become, part of the hard conversations that you have to ask here. Alfred Şengün, another player that you may have to ask some tough questions in regards to over that if you want to chase a star, believe in the development of those guys. Another superstar next to Kevin Durant with keeping the right young pieces around them, it really does make the Houston Rockets dangerous. And that's the thing that you have to look on with this team and ask yourself, how do you go about getting that, right? This is a team that has a really good financial outlook. They have a really good stack of draft picks as well into all of that, which I think you have now. But there's serious win now pressure for this team? And that's a question that you have to ask in regards to that, right? You have resources. When you look at the draft capital, right, they hold the 39th and the 53rd picks in the 2026 draft. Not necessarily great picks, but they do have, flexibility. They have the full non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which is worth $15 million. They also have a biannual exception of $5.5 million. And then they have trade assets like Dorian Finney-Smith, Tari Eason. If you want to get creative, maybe one of Jabari Smith as well that you can include in that. And I think the only way that you trade Alperen Şengün is that if you're making an absolute blockbuster trade, and that's what you run into as well. So the Houston Rockets outlook isn't as bad as some people think, right? You got Fred VanVleet coming back. You're getting some health in regards to that. But the draft capital that they do have, paired with the flexibility that they have because they are under the second tax apron, I think you sit in a spot really well. Like the Houston Rockets could have 2 first-round picks in 2027. Another 3 first-round picks in 2029. So they have flexibility that they can make the moves. The question just becomes about, does the right deal become available that makes sense for them while also being able to hold on to the right youth pieces? And that's what I think you have to look at. That is the overall offseason outlook for the Houston Rockets in that. But I want to hear from you guys in this one. The Houston Rockets are officially at a crossroads. Even after only 1 season of Kevin Durant, they did not go the way that they wanted it to go. So therefore, you're forced to ask some tough questions in regards to that. The future of your young pieces. How do you feel about that? Do you stay patient, or do you make another all-in move to try to go for it right now? Let me know down in the comments. Should the Rockets hold on to Kevin Durant? Should they look to trade him in the right situations? Would you bring James Harden back? And do you think that the Houston Rockets should pursue another superstar this offseason, or just continue trying to develop their own? But make sure you guys like the video, subscribe to the channel as well. You can follow us at NBA Central Pod on every social media platform. You send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, NBA Central Show at gmail.com. And then lastly, if you want to leave us a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the #1 spot for everything basketball related. You guys can follow us for all the latest basketball news, rumors, everything. This offseason is going to be fun, so make sure you guys stay in tune with us there. But that's it for me for today. I'll catch you guys the next time I feel like making a video, probably tomorrow. Peace, y'all.
Been a presentation of the Breaks Media.